If you are listening to this recording, I must implore you to cease immediately. What you are about to hear is not a mere narrative. It is evidence, an unutterable testament to the malignancy that lurks beneath the surface of our reality. Should you begin to perceive the acrid scent of ozone if the very air around you grows oppressively cold, or if you hear an incessant hum that reverberates deep within your bones, I beseech you, stop. Flee from this sound, for it is a conduit, a resonant frequency that beckons forth that which should remain eternally entombed. But alas, I fear it may already be too late for you. The entity I have unwittingly invited through this accursed static transcends mortal comprehension, and I dread that it now lingers in the shadows of your mind, feeding on your very essence. I'm recording this so someone knows how I died. A futile act of defiance against the abyssal resonance that has ensnared me. My words may be my final testament, a whisper in the void, as I prepare to confront the horror that waits beyond the threshold of sanity. The solitude of my office, a quaint relic of academia, has become an oppressive cocoon, suffocating beneath layers of dust and half-formed thoughts. The walls, adorned with tomes that whisper of forgotten epochs, echo the silence of my solitary musings. It was amidst these hallowed confines that I discovered the letter, an innocuous missive, penned in the spidery script of a long-deceased colleague. The contents spoke of a peculiar resonance emanating from the Hollow Mountain, an ancient edifice shrouded in myth and obscurity. In my rational pursuit of knowledge, skepticism pushed me to investigate. The mountain, a cyclopean structure of unfathomable age, had intrigued scholars and laymen alike, yet remained largely unexamined due to its remote location and the archaic terrors tied to it. The letter hinted at a discovery, a series of vibrations, oscillations of sound, that purportedly danced upon the edge of perception, a frequency capable of revealing the very fabric of our reality. As I prepared for my expedition, a chill crept into my bones. The air around me thickened with an unnatural stillness, as if time itself hesitated in the presence of the unknown. The hum of the city outside faded, replaced by an eerie tranquility that unsettled my senses. I knew I risked my sanity, yet the promise of unraveling the secrets of that mountain was too enticing to resist, too vital to ignore. Little did I comprehend that my thirst for knowledge would soon lead me to the precipice of madness, where reason falters and terror reigns. The journey to the Hollow Mountain was marked by an unsettling transition from the familiarity of civilization to the oppressive embrace of isolation. As I departed from the city, the cacophony of life fell away, replaced by an uncanny stillness that seemed to seep into the very marrow of my bones. The road wound like a serpent through cyclopean hills, their contours bathed in a sallow light that cast elongated shadows, as if the sun itself recoiled from the unfolding mystery. As I approached the outskirts of the village that skirted the mountain's base, I was struck by an unnatural disquiet. The structures, though quaint at first glance, bore an architecture that felt subtly askew, as if the very laws of geometry had been unnaturally warped. Windows, set at odd angles, seemed to peer out with a sentience of their own, silently observing my intrusion into their realm. The air grew cold, a frigid draft whispering across the cobblestones, stirring a fine dust that danced in the dim light. A dust that flickered with an unsettling iridescence, as though infused with the remnants of ancient, incomprehensible energies. The villagers, scarce and elusive, regarded me with an expression that oscillated between curiosity and dread. Their words, hushed and fragmented, hung in the air, tinged with an unnameable fear that tightened around my chest like an iron vice. They spoke of the mountain in reverent tones, not as an object of study, but as a living entity, imbued with both awe and terror. I noted the way their gazes flickered toward the peak, a monolithic silhouette etched against the horizon, its summit lost in the shroud of ominous clouds that churned above like a sentient storm. Yet even as I tread upon the threshold of this forsaken place, the resonance spoke to me, a distant echo that thrummed through the very earth, vibrating within my soul. It was a beckoning sound, promising to unveil the hidden truths of existence, and yet I could not escape the feeling that I was stepping into a realm where the fabric of reality began to fray. The silence stretched taut, as if the mountain itself held its breath, awaiting my first step into its abyssal depths. As I crossed the threshold of the mountain's maw, a shudder coursed through me, as if the very stones recoiled from my intrusion. The oppressive darkness enveloped me, a tangible shroud that gnawed at the edges of my sanity. The air was thick with the fetid aroma of decay, an ancient miasma that seemed to seep from the very walls, a reminder of the eons that had transpired since anything had dared to tread here. My footsteps echoed, each sound distorted and elongated in the vast, non-Euclidean expanse, the walls curving and twisting in angles that defied comprehension. With each step deeper into the mountain, I felt an insidious hum resonating through the ground, a heartbeat of the abyss itself, vibrating in synchrony with the pulse of my terror. The walls bore strange markings, glyphs that writhed before my eyes like living creatures, and I could almost hear them whisper words of a language lost to time, promising knowledge that no mortal mind should ever possess. I could not help but reach out, fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold stone, and in that instant, a surge of alien consciousness flooded my thoughts. Visions of eldritch vistas danced behind my eyelids, landscapes where the sky writhed and fell into unfathomable depths. As I continued into the winding corridors, the resonance intensified, a cacophony of sound rising to a fevered pitch, vibrating through my skull with maddening insistence. I pressed on, compelled by an insatiable curiosity that clawed at my reason, urging me forward into the heart of the mountain. The passageways twisted absurdly, leading me through chambers that defied the logic of geometry. I caught glimpses of horrors, shadows that flickered in my periphery, asymmetrical formations that seemed to pulse with an undeniable life of their own. Then, I stumbled upon the artifact, an angular door, wrought from obsidian and adorned with incomprehensible sigils that seemed to shift and warp beneath the gaze of the flickering torchlight. It loomed before me, a cyclopean threshold to realms unknown, radiating a palpable energy that thrummed in harmony with the resonance. I approached it, dread mingling with an intoxicating thrill, my heart hammering in my chest, a primal warning to flee, yet I stood transfixed. With a trembling hand, I pressed against its surface, and the moment my skin made contact, the door shuddered, as if it were a living entity, awakening from a long slumber. A deep, sonorous growl echoed through the chamber, a sound both seductive and horrifying, resonating within the very marrow of my being. The air thickened, charged with a palpable tension, and I felt the weight of countless eyes upon me, unseen entities lurking just beyond the veil of reality, a cacophony of whispers rising in a frenzied chorus, beckoning me to enter. Yet a flicker of reason battled within my mind, screaming to turn back, to escape the abyssal embrace of the mountain. But the resonance, insistent and seductive, wrapped around my thoughts like tendrils of smoke, promising enlightenment and destruction in equal measure. I hesitated, teetering on the precipice of madness, aware that whatever lay beyond this threshold should never have been summoned into the light of day. But the pull was insatiable. I steeled myself, heart pounding with dread and exhilaration in equal measure, and with a final, trembling breath, I heaved the door wide open. What lay beyond was an infinite void, an abyss that defied all comprehension, a swirling mass of darkness punctuated by flashes of unnameable horrors and glimpses of truths that twisted my very essence. In that moment, I knew I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, venturing into realms where no return was possible, where the whispers of the abyss would haunt my existence for all eternity. The moment I stepped into the void, an overwhelming sensation of dislocation enveloped me, as if the very fabric of reality had unraveled. The air, thick with an indescribable stench of decay and the rot of long-forgotten nightmares, clawed at my throat, choking the breath from my lungs. I felt the weight of spatial anomaly press against me, a non-Euclidean labyrinth that defied all principles I had clung to, walls that bent and twisted around me in grotesque contortions, warping my perception as I staggered deeper into the abyss. The sound of my own footsteps echoed, a grotesque squelching, as if the ground beneath me was alive, pulsating with an unholy rhythm that quickened my heartbeat. Each step reverberated through the darkness, merging with a cacophony of whispers that now rose to a fever pitch, an eldritch symphony composed of despair, madness, and the remnants of souls trapped in this infinite nightmare. They called out in a cacophony of languages, harmonizing in a way that should never have been, weaving a tapestry of dread around my fraying sanity. I turned to look back, but the door had vanished, swallowed by the abyss, leaving me adrift in a vastness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The geometry of the space warped sickeningly, angles twisting into impossible configurations that made my eyes ache and my stomach churn. I could feel my grip on reality slipping, as if the shadows themselves were reaching out, clawing at the edges of my mind, urging me to surrender to the chaos. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the chasm, a sound that resonated deep within my bones, reverberating like the growl of some slumbering beast awakened by my intrusion. The walls shimmered with a phosphorescent glow, revealing shapes that lurked just beyond the threshold of perception. Indescribable forms, writhing and shifting, their movements a mockery of life that defied all logic. I could almost hear them breathing, exhaling a fetid breath that rolled over me like an oppressive fog. My heart raced as I stumbled upon a tableau of nightmarish visions, a vast expanse of cyclopean architecture, structures jutting from the ground like jagged teeth, each one etched with runes that seethed and writhed, beckoning me closer with promises of forbidden knowledge. I recognized the architecture from ancient texts, a place spoken of in hushed tones, a land where time itself unraveled, yet here it loomed, tangible and terrifying, mocking my previous understanding of existence. Then, with a suddenness that stole my breath, I felt the resonance shift, a pulse that began to sync with my own heartbeat. It was as if the mountain itself had awakened, responding to my presence with a hungry awareness that sent a jolt of icy terror coursing through my veins. I could feel it watching, an unseen entity intent on my unraveling, and in that moment I realized that I was not alone. The shadows danced closer, forming into grotesque silhouettes that flickered in and out of existence, their cold, empty eyes fixated on me, promising a fate far worse than death. The whispers intensified, merging into a singular voice, a cacophony of malice that tore through my mind, drowning out my thoughts. I stumbled back, desperation clawing at my throat as I sought an escape, but with each passing second, the realization sank deeper, that there was no escape from this cosmic horror, from the abyss that craved my very essence. I was ensnared in its embrace, a marionette dangling on strings woven from the fabric of chaos itself. In my last moment of lucidity, amid the swelling tide of madness, I felt a chilling certainty envelop me. Knowledge was not enlightenment, but a curse, a path paved with the marrow of despair, leading only to the hollow echoes of forgotten souls. And as the abyss closed in, I knew with stark clarity that this was my fate, to wander eternally within the dark embrace of the mountain, a wretched whisper in the chorus of the damned. From the very depths of the resonating gloom emerged a horrific truth that twisted the fabric of my sanity. The geometry surrounding me, once a mere curiosity in the annals of forbidden knowledge, now writhed with a sentience of its own, a malevolent force that seemed to warp and contort in ways that defied earthly comprehension. Edges that should have been straight splintered into abhorrent arcs, while surfaces undulated like the skin of some grotesque beast, slick and pulsating with a residue that exuded a stench of decay, a miasma of rot that clawed at my throat and filled my lungs with the taste of putrescence. As I stumbled deeper into this nightmare, the very ground beneath me morphed, every step a torment, as the floor shifted in an agonizing rhythm, pushing and pulling in directions that defied reason. I could hear the wet squelch of my own footsteps echoing against the cyclopean walls, each sound a bitter reminder of my corporeal existence in a realm that sought to obliterate it. The shadows coalesced into forms that writhed like serpents, slick and glistening under the ghastly phosphorescence that illuminated the grotesque architecture around me. Then came the whispers again, a dissonant chorus that surged through the air like a wave of malignant intent, each syllable resonating with the terrible truth I had yet to fully grasp. They taunted me with the knowledge of the Ancient Ones, the architects of this abyssal monstrosity. I glimpsed their incomprehensible designs etched into the very stone, non-Euclidean angles that sliced through the mind like shards of ice, each rune pulsing with a malevolence that threatened to unravel my thoughts. Suddenly, the floor fell away beneath me, plunging me into a chasm of darkness, the very void itself beckoning with a seductive lull that promised oblivion. It was then I saw it, the heart of the mountain, an indescribable entity, a confluence of forms that shifted fluidly, like a liquid nightmare spilling forth from some primordial rift. Its visage was a cacophony of eyes, mouths, and tendrils, each part of it a mockery of life and death, caught in an eternal dance of agony and ecstasy. The very sight of it clawed at the fabric of my reality, tearing threads of sanity with its mere existence. I fell silent, paralyzed by the enormity of the revelation that unfolded before me. This creature, this eldritch abomination, was not merely an inhabitant of the mountain, it was the mountain itself, a cyclopean horror composed of dread and despair, a living testament to the doom that awaited all who dared venture into its grasp. As it turned its multitude of eyes upon me, each gaze pierced through to my core, unraveling my very essence, I became acutely aware of my fate. The whispers grew ever louder, a symphony of despair that spoke of my insignificance within the vast cosmos, a reminder that I was but a fleeting thought in the mind of the abyss. In that moment of utter clarity, I understood that the knowledge I had sought, the truths buried within the tomes of the ancients, had led me here, to this moment of irrevocable madness. Fate had conspired against me, and as the entity beckoned with a tendril that shimmered with an oily sheen, I realized the depths of my folly. To grasp at understanding was to court madness, and as I extended my trembling hand toward that wretched invitation, I felt time itself fracture around me, the echoes of lost souls resonating within the chamber, their cries a harrowing dirge that heralded my eternal descent into the abyss. I felt time itself fracture around me, the echoes of lost souls resonating within the chamber, their cries a harrowing dirge that heralded my eternal descent into the abyss. The tendril loomed closer, its oily sheen reflecting the grotesque light of the phosphorescence, and as it neared, I could perceive the intricate dance of sentient filaments that coiled and uncoiled in a hypnotic rhythm. It beckoned me, promising revelations of the unfathomable, and yet all I could feel was an impending dread that wrapped around my heart like the cold tendrils of death itself. In that moment of paralyzing terror, I wrestled with the agonizing choice that lay before me. To touch that wretched appendage would be to embrace the very essence of despair, to become a vessel for the dark knowledge that would rend my sanity asunder. Yet, the whispers rose to a fevered pitch, a maddening cacophony that clawed at the recesses of my mind, urging me to seek communion with this abomination. I could scarcely think, my thoughts draping themselves in a shroud of despair, as the creature's multitude of eyes bore into my very soul, each gaze a promise of obliteration. With every agonizing heartbeat, I could feel my very being unraveling, the fabric of my humanity fraying beneath the weight of its indifferent gaze. The chamber swelled around me, the cyclopean walls pulsating with a rhythm that echoed the sinister thrum of the entity's presence. I could barely breathe, the air thickening with the stench of decay, pervading my senses, suffocating any rational thought that dared to rise against the tide of madness. In a defiant moment of clarity, I withdrew my trembling hand, grasping desperately for the remnants of my fading will. But as I did, the whisper shifted, a discordant harmony that morphed into a single chilling voice. A voice that was not a voice at all, but a soundless scream that reverberated within the very marrow of my bones. It spoke of my insignificance, my folly, and the futile quest for knowledge that had led me to this abyssal maw. The ground quaked beneath me, and a violent shudder racked through the mountain, a prelude to the inevitable. The walls began to close in, the non-Euclidean angles warping to form a confining embrace, a gaping maw ready to consume me whole. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping upon the slick surface, falling into the onslaught of terror that enveloped me. Desperation clawed at my throat. I turned, racing toward the only sanctuary I had left, the crumbling remnants of the chamber I had foolishly thought to explore. I reached the threshold of a safe room, its walls etched with the sigils of forgotten gods, a tenuous barrier against the monstrosity that lay beyond. As I pressed my back against the cold stone, I felt the vibrations of the entity's movement, a distant tremor that heralded its approach. But even here, in this fleeting haven, I could feel the shadows encroaching, the whispers slithering through the cracks, weaving their way into my consciousness. I clasped my hands over my ears, but the sound surged through me, relentless and invasive, and I felt the tendrils of my own sanity begin to fray, just as they had frayed the very fabric of this accursed place. And now, as I record this final log, my last, desperate attempt to assert my existence, I know I am not alone. The very walls seem to breathe, to pulse with the life of the abyss, and I can feel the entity's presence pressing in upon me, a foreboding weight that signals the end of my futile resistance. I am trapped in this paradox, a fleeting thought in the vast expanse of an indifferent cosmos, and as it draws closer, I realize with a cold clarity that I shall soon be one with the shadows, a mere echo of despair in the annals of this eldritch mountain. The whispers have become a symphony now, a chorus of madness that sings my inevitable fate, and I am left to ponder the abyss that waits, the darkness that cradles me in its unyielding embrace. It is here that I will remain, forever bound to this hollow mountain, a testament to the folly of those who dare seek knowledge that was never meant to be found. Comment now. I can still hear its haunting call echoing.
Now tell me, what detail tested your sanity first? Drop it in the comments, then click the next video, because the veil opens even wider in our next descent into the mythos.